You were never worthy of becoming a duke's bride.
Eulalie grabbed the hem of my ivory gown, and with one vicious pull, ripped it straight down the front. Gasps echoed beneath glittering chandeliers, while every noble lady smirked, waiting for me to flee in humiliation. You were never worthy of becoming a duke's bride, Eulalie whispered with a smile only I could hear. My hands trembled, but before I could cover the torn fabric, a pair of polished black boots stopped directly in front of me. The entire room froze. Why was Duke Alaric Vossmere standing before the one woman everyone had just mocked? And why was he smiling? What happened next left the entire kingdom speechless. If you love dramatic Regency romances filled with shocking betrayals, powerful dukes, and unforgettable revenge, subscribe now, because you do not want to miss what happens in the next part. The smile on Duke Alaric Vossmere's face made the whispers die faster than the music. Nobody understood it. Neither did I. I stood frozen in the middle of the grand ballroom, my torn gown hanging from my shoulders, while hundreds of noble eyes waited for me to burst into tears. My cheeks burned with shame, but I refused to cry. If I cried, Eulalie would win. She had always loved watching me break. The Duke slowly removed the dark velvet coat from his shoulders. Before I realized what he intended, he draped it around me with gentle care, covering every ripped piece of fabric. His voice was calm, yet every word carried through the ballroom. I believe no lady deserves to be treated with such cruelty. Silence. Not a single noble dared to breathe. Eulalie's triumphant smile vanished. My stepmother, Lady Odette, looked as though the floor had disappeared beneath her feet. I lowered my eyes, unable to understand why one of the kingdom's most sought-after dukes had chosen to defend someone everyone considered insignificant. His fingers brushed mine, only for a moment. "Hold your head high," he murmured. Then he stepped away, as though nothing extraordinary had happened. Yet everything had changed. The noble ladies who had laughed only moments earlier suddenly looked uncertain. Some even lowered their eyes in embarrassment. Others stared at me with envy. The Duke returned to his place beside the royal dais, without offering another explanation. That mystery followed me long after I escaped the ballroom. Even now, I still remember every heartbeat from that night, because it wasn't only my dress that had been torn apart. It was the life I had been forced to endure. My name is Lysandra Wrenley. Most people inside that ballroom only knew me as Lady Odette's quiet stepdaughter. Very few remembered that I had once belonged to one of the oldest families in the kingdom. My father, Cedric Wrenley, had been respected by merchants and nobles alike. He possessed no title beyond gentleman, yet everyone admired his honesty. Our countryside estate was never the grandest, but it was filled with laughter, music, and fresh roses blooming beneath my mother's windows. Then illness stole my mother before I turned 12. The house became unbearably quiet. Father tried to smile for my sake. He promised nothing would ever separate us. I believed him, until he married again. Lady Odette arrived with expensive gowns, polished manners, and a daughter only a year older than me, Eulalie. At first, she smiled sweetly. She braided my hair. She called me sister. She even shared desserts with me after supper. I thought heaven had answered my prayers. I was wrong. The kindness lasted only until Father wasn't watching. The moment his footsteps faded down the hallway, her smile disappeared. She hid my books. She ruined my embroidery. She blamed broken china on me. Whenever I tried defending myself, Lady Odette always believed her own daughter. Father apologized countless times. "I know your heart, Lysandra," he would whisper after every punishment. But apologies never stopped the cruelty. Years passed. Their insults became ordinary sounds inside the house. Too plain, too quiet, too soft. Not noble enough, not beautiful enough. I stopped arguing. Instead, I found comfort elsewhere. Every morning before sunrise, I wandered into Mother's old rose garden. The gardeners had nearly abandoned it after her passing. Wild vines climbed over cracked stone paths. Most people saw weeds. I saw memories. I trimmed every rose bush myself. I planted new flowers every spring. I spoke to them whenever loneliness became too heavy. Old Bram, the head gardener, often laughed when he caught me kneeling in the soil. Flowers always bloom for gentle hands, he used to say. People don't always deserve the same kindness. At the time, I thought he simply disliked society. Now I realize he was trying to warn me. Our estate slowly changed after Father fell ill. Lady Odette handled every household account. Servants who had known me since childhood quietly disappeared one after another. New servants answered only to her. Rooms that once belonged to my mother were emptied. Portraits vanished from the walls. Even Father's study became locked most evenings. Whenever I asked questions, Lady Odette smiled politely. Business matters are too complicated for young ladies. Father seemed tired all the time. He rarely argued anymore. Sometimes I caught him staring out the library window as though he wanted to say something, but he never did. Then, one cold winter morning, he never woke again. The funeral ended beneath gray skies. Before the final prayer had even faded into silence, Lady Odette began changing everything. She controlled the estate, she controlled the servants, she controlled my allowance. According to her, I should be grateful she had allowed me to remain under her roof. Eulalie never missed an opportunity to remind me. You eat because my mother permits it. You wear dresses because my mother pays for them. You exist because we're generous. None of it was true. But truth meant very little inside that house. The only person who continued treating me with warmth was old Bram. One afternoon, while helping him prune roses, he handed me a single white bloom. "This one refuses to die," he said quietly. "No matter how harsh the winter." I smiled. "So?" He looked directly into my eyes. "Perhaps you're more like this rose than you know." His words stayed with me. Weeks later, royal messengers arrived carrying astonishing news. His Majesty had announced a grand bride selection. Every unmarried noblewoman of respectable birth would be presented before the highest-ranking gentleman of the kingdom. Among them stood the unmarried Duke Alaric Vossmere. Every household erupted with excitement. Lady Odette certainly did. She ordered expensive fabrics from the capital. Jewels arrived almost daily. Dressmakers worked from sunrise until midnight. Everything revolved around Eulalie. Every fitting, every lesson, every dance. I wasn't expected to attend, until one servant quietly reminded Lady Odette that my father's family name still qualified me. The room became strangely silent. Lady Odette forced a smile. Of course Lysandra will attend, but something about the way she looked at Eulalie made my stomach tighten. That night, as I passed outside Eulalie's bedroom, I heard laughter behind the closed door. Then I heard my own name. I couldn't make out every word. Only one sentence reached me clearly. "She won't outshine me." The next morning my gown was delivered. It was beautiful. Too beautiful. For the first time in years, Lady Odette praised my appearance without hesitation. Eulalie smiled more sweetly than ever before. Neither of them had ever been so kind. Something felt terribly wrong. I simply didn't know how dangerous that kindness truly was. The morning of the bride selection arrived beneath a pale golden sky, yet the air inside the estate felt heavy enough to steal every breath from my lungs. Servants rushed through the corridors carrying silk gowns, jewel boxes, polished shoes, and trays of perfume. Everyone moved around Eulalie as though she were already a duchess. No one noticed me. That was nothing new. I dressed quietly inside my small bedroom. Fastening the last pearl button on the gown Lady Odette had surprisingly gifted me. It fit perfectly. The ivory fabric shimmered softly whenever sunlight touched it. For a moment, I barely recognized the young woman staring back from the mirror. She looked hopeful. That frightened me. Hope had always been dangerous inside this house. A gentle knock interrupted my thoughts. Old Bram stepped inside carrying a single white rose. "I thought this belonged with you." He tucked the flower into my hair with trembling hands. "My mother used to wear white roses," I whispered. "I remember." His eyes grew distant. So did every honest soul who ever knew her. He hesitated before speaking again. "If something feels wrong today," he stopped himself. "What is it?" I asked. Bram forced a weak smile. "Nothing." But his worried face stayed with me, long after he left. Downstairs, Lady Odette welcomed guests with effortless grace, while Eulalie admired herself inside a tall mirror framed in gold. The moment they saw me, both women became unusually quiet. Lady Odette slowly walked around me, pretending to inspect every detail of my appearance. "You clean up rather well." Eulalie smiled. "I almost didn't recognize you." I thanked them politely, though every instinct warned me not to trust either smile. The carriage ride toward the royal palace felt endless. Eulalie spoke excitedly about dukes, earls, fortunes, and titles. Lady Odette encouraged every dream. I stared through the carriage window instead. Villages disappeared behind us. Fields stretched beneath the summer breeze. Children waved as noble carriages rolled past. For a brief moment, I wished life could remain that simple. Then the palace came into view. Its white marble towers reached into the clouds. Golden banners fluttered above enormous gates. Crystal fountains sparkled beneath the morning sun. Hundreds of elegant carriages filled the entrance. Ladies from every corner of the kingdom stepped onto crimson carpets, wearing gowns more beautiful than anything I had ever imagined. Jewels glittered like tiny stars. Laughter echoed across the gardens. The bride selection had become the grandest event of the season. Inside, servants guided us through endless halls decorated with paintings of kings and queens from centuries past. Everywhere I looked, noble families whispered behind decorated fans. Some recognized Lady Odette. Others admired Eulalie. Very few acknowledged me. I preferred it that way. As we entered the preparation chamber, dozens of young ladies gathered before enormous mirrors, while maids adjusted ribbons and sleeves. The excitement was impossible to ignore. Some girls practiced graceful curtsies. Others whispered prayers beneath their breath. Everyone hoped destiny would change before sunset. I found a quiet corner near one of the windows. Peace never lasted long. Eulalie approached with two ladies trailing behind her. Her smile looked harmless. "I've been thinking." I looked up. "We've spent years together." "Yes. I would hate for anyone to think there's distance between sisters." I frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" She reached toward my shoulder. At first, I believed she wanted to straighten my sleeve. Instead, her fingers tightened around the delicate lace. She leaned closer until only I could hear her voice. "You should remember your place before everyone else reminds you." Then she stepped back. Nothing happened, not yet. She smiled sweetly, as though our conversation had been pleasant. The royal trumpets suddenly echoed through the palace. Every lady hurried toward the grand ballroom. My heartbeat quickened. This was it. The doors slowly opened. Music filled the enormous hall. Crystal chandeliers reflected thousands of tiny lights across polished marble floors. Rows of noble gentlemen stood watching, as each young lady entered one after another. At the far end of the ballroom stood the royal family. Beside them, Duke Alaric Vossmere. Even from a distance, his presence commanded attention. Tall, composed, unreadable. His dark eyes swept across the room without lingering on anyone. People claimed he had refused every marriage proposal for years. Some believed he was too proud. Others whispered that his heart belonged to a woman who had died long ago. No one truly knew. The presentations began. One lady curtsied, another danced, another performed music. Each received polite applause. Eulalie's confidence only grew stronger. When her turn arrived, she moved with perfect elegance. Lady Odette beamed with pride. The nobles applauded warmly. Eulalie basked in every moment. Then my name echoed through the ballroom. Lysandra Wrenley. A strange silence followed. Perhaps they expected little from the forgotten stepdaughter. I lifted my chin and walked forward. 1 step, 2, 3. The marble floor reflected every movement. My hands trembled beneath the folds of my gown, but I kept walking. I remembered Father's voice. Walk with kindness, not fear. I reached the center of the ballroom, curtsied, raised my eyes. For one impossible second, Duke Alaric looked directly at me, not through me, at me. His expression changed almost too quickly to notice. recognition. It vanished before I understood it. Confusion settled inside me. Had we met before? That made no sense. I had never spoken to a duke in my life. Before I could think further, footsteps approached behind me. Eulalie. She smiled brightly for everyone watching. My dear sister. I turned slightly. Then pain exploded across my shoulder. Her hand yanked the delicate fabric with brutal force. The sound of tearing silk echoed through the silent ballroom. The front of my gown split open. Gasps filled the room. Someone laughed. Another voice whispered that I should leave before embarrassing myself further. Heat rushed into my face. I instinctively tried covering the torn dress with trembling hands. Eulalie stepped backward wearing the perfect expression of fake horror. "Oh, Lysandra." Her voice dripped with false sympathy. "How unfortunate." Lady Odette rushed forward, not to help me, but to scold. What carelessness. I stared at them in disbelief. Neither woman intended to hide what they had done. They wanted everyone to believe I had humiliated myself. Every noble eye turned toward me. Some pitied me. Most enjoyed the spectacle. For one terrifying heartbeat, I considered running. If I fled now, this nightmare would end. No more whispers, no more laughter, no more shame. My foot shifted backward. That tiny movement felt insignificant. It wasn't, because at that exact moment, another pair of footsteps echoed across the ballroom. Slow, certain, coming straight toward me. And the choice I made next would change not only my future, but the fate of everyone standing in that room. I almost stepped back. Almost. But something inside me refused to let Eulalie have the victory she wanted. My father had spent years teaching me that dignity could never be stolen unless I surrendered it myself. So I remained where I stood, even though every heartbeat begged me to disappear. The footsteps stopped in front of me. I lifted my eyes. Duke Alaric Vossmere stood so close that the ballroom around us seemed to vanish. Without a word, he removed his velvet coat and placed it carefully around my shoulders. Warmth settled over me, not only from the fabric, from the kindness I had almost forgotten existed. His voice was calm, yet it reached every corner of the hall. No woman should ever be shamed for another person's cruelty. The silence became heavier than stone. No one moved. No one dared interrupt him. Lady Odette's face lost every trace of color. Eulalie looked as though she had forgotten how to breathe. The Duke turned toward the gathered nobles. I witnessed what happened. Those 4 words struck the room harder than thunder. A murmur swept through the crowd. Several ladies who had been standing nearby lowered their heads. They had seen everything too. Until that moment, none of them had intended to speak. Now they exchanged uneasy glances. One elderly countess finally broke the silence. "It is true," another lady nodded. "I saw Lady Eulalie pull the gown." Then another voice joined them. So did I. The whispers quickly became impossible to ignore. Eulalie's confident smile disappeared completely. Lady Odette hurried forward. "There must be some misunderstanding." "There isn't," the Duke replied. He never raised his voice. He didn't need to. His calmness carried more authority than shouting ever could. Eulalie forced tears into her eyes. "I only wished to help my sister." The lace must have caught my bracelet. No one answered. The excuse sounded weak, even to her. King Aldrin watched the scene from the royal platform with narrowed eyes. Beside him, the Queen whispered something neither I nor anyone else could hear. Moments later, one of the royal chamberlains stepped forward. "The presentations will continue." Music slowly returned. Conversations resumed. But nothing felt normal anymore. Every noble looked at me differently. Not because of my torn dress, because the Duke had chosen to defend me. As I stepped away from the center of the ballroom, countless eyes followed every movement. Some held sympathy, others carried curiosity. Many burned with jealousy. I wasn't sure which frightened me more. A palace maid quietly approached. "My lady." She lowered her head respectfully. "This way, please." I followed her through a side corridor into a beautifully furnished sitting room. Another servant entered, carrying a fresh gown of pale blue silk. The palace keeps spare garments for unexpected situations. I blinked in surprise. "You may change here." The servants treated me with a respect I hadn't experienced since father's death. No insults, no impatient sighs, no cruel smiles. When I finally looked into the mirror wearing the new dress, I barely recognized myself. The frightened girl from earlier seemed to have disappeared. Not because I had become stronger, because someone had reminded me that I deserved basic kindness. That realization frightened me almost as much as Eulalie's betrayal. How had I accepted mistreatment for so many years? As I returned toward the ballroom, I noticed conversations stopping whenever I walked past. People stared, some bowed politely, others whispered behind closed fans. News traveled faster than wildfire inside the palace. Everyone already knew. Near one of the marble columns, I unexpectedly crossed paths with Duke Alaric. He appeared alone. His expression remained unreadable. I immediately curtsied. "Your Grace, you needn't thank me." His words caught me off guard. I wasn't going to. For the first time, the corner of his mouth lifted slightly. "I know." That tiny smile vanished almost instantly. He studied me for a long moment. "Did they often treat you that way?" The question settled heavily between us. I wanted to lie, to protect my family's reputation, to pretend everything was fine. Instead, I answered honestly. "They've done worse." His jaw tightened. I noticed it only because I happened to be looking directly at him. "I'm sorry you endured that." No one had ever apologized to me for pain they hadn't caused. The words almost broke my composure. "I survived. You shouldn't have needed to." Silence followed. It wasn't uncomfortable, only unfamiliar. He looked toward the ballroom entrance before speaking again. People reveal themselves when they believe no one important is watching. Then he walked away. I remained standing there long after he disappeared into the crowd. His words echoed inside my thoughts. People reveal themselves. Perhaps Eulalie hadn't simply ruined my dress. Perhaps she had revealed the truth she could no longer hide. The remainder of the evening passed like a dream. Several noble ladies approached me. Some apologized for laughing earlier. Others awkwardly introduced themselves. A few even invited me to visit their estates. It felt strange. Hours earlier, none of them had noticed I existed. Now they wanted my friendship. I couldn't tell whether their kindness belonged to me or to the Duke's approval. That uncertainty stayed with me. As sunset painted the palace windows gold, the bride selection finally ended. No engagements were announced. No names were chosen. The royal family thanked every participant before dismissing the gathering. Relief washed over me. I only wanted to return home. The carriage ride back felt painfully quiet. Lady Odette never looked in my direction. Eulalie sat with folded arms, staring through the opposite window. The silence finally shattered. "You embarrassed this family." I looked at Lady Odette. "I embarrassed us? If you had behaved properly, none of today's nonsense would have happened." My chest tightened. Eulalie tore my gown. Lady Odette laughed softly. "And who will believe that?" I stared at her in disbelief. The entire ballroom saw it. They saw what the Duke allowed them to see. Her cold confidence unsettled me. She wasn't worried, not even after being exposed. That meant she believed she still held power. Eulalie suddenly leaned closer. "You think today changed anything?" Her voice became almost playful. "It didn't." I remained silent. She smiled. "The Duke protected you once." She paused deliberately. "He won't always be there." The carriage stopped before our estate. Darkness had already settled across the gardens. As soon as we entered the house, Lady Odette dismissed every servant from the entrance hall. The large doors closed behind us with a heavy sound. She slowly removed her gloves. "I warned you never to seek attention. I never did. You accepted the Duke's kindness." "I accepted a coat because my dress was destroyed." Her eyes hardened. "That single moment has placed this family under unwanted attention." Something about her words struck me. Not fear, panic. She wasn't upset because of the torn gown. She was terrified that someone powerful had looked too closely at our family. For the first time, I wondered whether Eulalie's cruelty was hiding something much larger than jealousy. That night I couldn't sleep. The estate felt unusually restless. Footsteps echoed through distant corridors long after midnight. Voices whispered behind closed doors. Curiosity overcame caution. I quietly left my bedroom. As I reached Father's old study, I noticed light beneath the door. Lady Odette was inside. She wasn't alone. A man's unfamiliar voice spoke in hurried whispers. "We have a problem." Lady Odette answered immediately. "No!" A long silence followed. Then the stranger spoke words that turned my blood cold. "The Duke has started asking questions about the Wrenley estate." My heart nearly stopped. Questions. About my family. About Father. About us. Without realizing it, I shifted my weight. The old wooden floor creaked beneath my foot. The voices inside stopped. Then someone reached for the door handle. The door handle turned. My heart pounded so hard I thought they would hear it before they ever saw me. Without thinking, I slipped behind one of the tall marble statues that stood along the corridor. The study door opened. A man dressed in a dark traveling cloak stepped outside. His face remained hidden beneath the shadow of his hat. He paused. For one terrifying moment, I believed he had sensed me. Instead, he looked both ways down the corridor before disappearing toward the back entrance of the estate. Lady Odette followed him, only long enough to lock the study. She held a small iron key tightly in her hand before hiding it inside the sleeve of her gown. Then she walked away. I remained frozen until every sound faded. Only then did I breathe again. Questions flooded my mind. Why was a stranger meeting Lady Odette in the middle of the night? Why was the Duke asking about Father's estate? Most of all, what had everyone been hiding from me? I waited until the house fell completely silent before returning to my room. Sleep never came. When dawn finally arrived, I dressed quickly and went straight to the rose garden. It had always been the only place where my thoughts became clear. Old Bram was already there, trimming the bushes. The moment he saw my face, he lowered the shears. "You heard something." It wasn't a question. I stared at him. "You knew." He looked away. I knew the day would come. Anger rose inside me for the first time in years. "You watched me suffer. I had no power." "You could have told me the truth." His shoulders slumped beneath the weight of age. "I promised your father." The mention of father stopped me. "He made you promise?" Bram nodded slowly. "He feared that if you learned too much too soon, they would come after you before you were ready." My breathing became uneven. Ready for what? Instead of answering, Bram reached beneath the old wooden gardening bench. He pulled out a weathered leather box wrapped in faded cloth. "I've protected this for 8 years. He placed it into my trembling hands. "It belongs to you." Inside lay Father's signet ring. Beneath it rested a small silver key. Nothing more. I looked up in confusion. "What does this open?" "I don't know." "You've never tried?" He shook his head. "Your father forbade it." Before I could ask another question, hurried footsteps echoed across the garden. A young palace guard entered through the front gate, carrying the royal crest. Every servant immediately stopped working. Lady Odette hurried outside with Eulalie following close behind. The guard bowed respectfully. "I bring a summons from His Grace, Duke Alaric Vossmere." Lady Odette smiled confidently. "My daughter Eulalie has been expecting." The guard interrupted her. "The summons is for Lady Lysandra Wrenley." Silence spread across the garden. Eulalie's face twisted with disbelief. Lady Odette forced another smile. "There must be some mistake." "There is none." He turned toward me. "His Grace requests your presence at Vossmere Manor this afternoon." Every servant stared openly. No one had expected this, least of all me. Lady Odette stepped closer before anyone else could speak. "My stepdaughter has been overwhelmed since yesterday." Nevertheless, the guard remained firm. "The invitation stands." He handed me a sealed card before leaving as quickly as he had arrived. The moment the gates closed behind him, Lady Odette's pleasant expression vanished. She grabbed my wrist so tightly it hurt. "You will refuse." "I haven't even read it." "You don't need to." Her nails dug deeper into my skin. "You are not setting foot inside that manor." For years I would have obeyed. For years I would have apologized. This time, I gently pulled my hand free. I intend to hear what the Duke has to say. The look in her eyes changed. Not anger, fear, real fear. You foolish girl. Her voice shook. You have no idea what you're walking into. Then tell me. She remained silent. You won't. I looked directly into her eyes. I've spent years believing every word you've spoken. I swallowed the ache in my throat. No longer. I turned and walked away, before she could stop me. It was the first time I had ever chosen my own path. The journey to Vossmere Manor passed in complete silence. Every mile seemed to carry me farther away from the frightened girl who had hidden inside herself for years. The manor rose above the hills like something from a dream. Tall stone walls surrounded elegant gardens. Fountains sparkled beneath ancient oak trees. Yet despite its beauty, the estate felt peaceful rather than proud. A butler welcomed me with quiet respect. His Grace is waiting. I expected a grand drawing room. Instead, I was led into a library, lined from floor to ceiling with books. Duke Alaric stood beside the fireplace. He turned as I entered. You came. You asked. For a brief moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, he gestured toward 2 chairs. I won't waste your time. His directness surprised me. I've spent several years investigating irregular financial records involving several noble estates. I frowned. I don't understand. Your father's estate is one of them. The room suddenly felt colder. My father was an honest man. I know. You do? I knew him. Everything inside me stopped. You knew my father? Alaric nodded. He saved my life 12 years ago. I stared at him in disbelief. He never mentioned you. He wasn't allowed to. Before I could ask why, another voice echoed from the doorway. Because some secrets were never meant to survive. We both turned. Lady Odette stood at the entrance. Eulalie was beside her. Behind them stood the same cloaked stranger I had seen leaving father's study. Several armed men entered with him. The butler lay unconscious on the floor behind them. My blood turned to ice. Lady Odette smiled calmly. I warned you not to come. The stranger slowly removed his gloves. I had hoped this conversation would never happen. Alaric stepped protectively in front of me. You've made a serious mistake. The man laughed softly. No. His eyes settled on me. Your father made the mistake. The silver key inside my pocket suddenly felt heavier than stone. The stranger noticed my movement. His smile disappeared. So, he whispered. He gave it to her after all. Every armed man in the room reached for their weapons. The doors slammed shut behind us. There was nowhere left to run. Alaric leaned closer without taking his eyes off the men surrounding us. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Whatever happens next. He held out his hand toward me. Do not let them take that key. I looked at the frightened servants lying outside the doorway. I looked at the armed men. Then at Lady Odette. She had never loved me. She had only needed something I possessed without even knowing it. For the first time in my life, I understood that I wasn't fighting to protect my pride. I was fighting to protect my father's final trust. Slowly, I closed my fingers around the silver key. Then I made the hardest decision I had ever faced. Instead of handing it over to save myself, I slipped it into Duke Alaric's hand. If only one of us leaves this room alive, I whispered, let it be the truth. The stranger's furious shout shook the entire library. Take them both, and the first sword was drawn. Steel clashed against steel. The library erupted into chaos. One of the armed men lunged toward Duke Alaric, but he met the attack with astonishing speed. The sword was knocked aside before it could reach him. Another rushed toward me. I stumbled backward until my shoulders struck one of the towering bookshelves. Fear threatened to take control. Not again. I had spent years standing still while others decided my fate. I refused to do it now. I grabbed the heavy brass candle holder from a nearby table and swung it with every bit of strength I possessed. The man cried out as it struck his arm, forcing his sword onto the floor. It wasn't graceful, it wasn't elegant, but it gave me enough time to run. Lady Odette's voice echoed through the room. Don't let her escape. 2 more men charged after me. Before they reached me, palace guards burst through the shattered library doors. The captain raised his sword. Protect his grace. The room became a blur of movement. The stranger who had led the attack realized his advantage had vanished. He reached for me one last time, but Alaric intercepted him. Their swords collided again and again, until the stranger lost his balance. His weapon slid across the polished floor. Guards surrounded him before he could recover. Lady Odette looked around in disbelief. Everything she had planned was falling apart. Eulalie stood frozen near the doorway, trembling violently. For the first time since she had entered my life, she looked frightened instead of proud. The captain ordered every attacker seized. As the guards searched the stranger, they discovered sealed account books hidden beneath his cloak. Alaric immediately recognized the markings. So it was true. The stranger laughed bitterly, despite the chains around his wrists. You'll never repair what we've already destroyed. Alaric calmly opened one of the ledgers. His expression darkened. They stole estates. He turned another page. They forged signatures. Another page. They arranged deaths to seize inheritances. My hands began shaking. Father. He had never simply fallen victim to misfortune. He had been standing in the way of people willing to destroy anyone who threatened their greed. Tears filled my eyes, but I refused to look away. The truth hurt, yet living without it had hurt even more. Lady Odette suddenly collapsed into a chair. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. Her voice had become small, almost broken. You chose this, I said quietly. She looked at me with exhausted eyes. I married your father because they promised security. She swallowed hard. When he discovered what they were doing, he wanted to expose everyone. A painful silence settled over the room. I begged him to stay quiet. She covered her face. He refused. The answer I had searched for all these years finally stood before me. Father had never abandoned me. He had been trying to protect me until his final breath. Old Bram had known. The Duke had suspected. Only I had remained trapped inside the lies. Eulalie slowly stepped forward. Her eyes were red from crying. I didn't know they killed him. No one answered. She looked at her mother. You told me father died from illness. Lady Odette couldn't meet her daughter's eyes. I lied. Eulalie staggered backward, as though the truth had struck her across the face. For years, she had believed herself the favored daughter of a clever mother. Instead, she discovered she had been another piece in someone else's game. She looked toward me. Real tears rolled down her cheeks. I'm sorry. The words came too late. Not because I wanted revenge, because some wounds cannot disappear the moment someone regrets causing them. I looked at her for a long time. I forgive you. She stared at me in surprise. But forgiveness doesn't erase what happened. She lowered her head. I know. The royal court moved swiftly. Within days, the stranger and every noble connected to the stolen estates were arrested. The ledgers contained years of hidden payments, false documents, and names that shocked the entire kingdom. Lady Odette surrendered without resistance. She confessed everything she knew. The court stripped her of every privilege she had gained through deception. She spent the rest of her life under strict confinement, far from the society she had valued above everything else. Eulalie chose not to follow her. Instead, she left the capital alone. Before her departure, she visited the rose garden one final time. I don't expect another chance, she said. I only wanted you to know I finally understand what I became. I nodded quietly. Neither of us embraced. Some distances cannot be crossed again, but hatred no longer stood between us. Only sadness. Father's estate was returned to me after the investigation ended. Walking through the familiar halls felt different. The portraits of my parents were restored to their places. Mother's music room opened once again. The servants who had been dismissed unfairly gradually returned. Old Bram cried openly the day he saw fresh roses blooming beneath the windows. I promised your father I'd protect what he loved. He smiled through his tears. I think he'd be proud now. For the first time in many years, the house felt alive. Weeks later, Duke Alaric visited the estate. We walked through the gardens where white roses bloomed beneath the afternoon sun. I owe your father more than I can ever repay, he said. You've already honored him. He looked at me. No, His voice remained gentle. I simply helped reveal the truth. I smiled. And that truth gave me back my life. He reached into his coat and placed Father's signet ring into my hand. I believe this belongs with its rightful owner. I closed my fingers around it. The weight felt comforting instead of painful. So much has changed. It has. I used to think kindness made people weak. I looked across the garden where the roses swayed in the breeze. Now I know it takes far more courage than cruelty ever will. Alaric smiled. So your father taught you well. He did. Months later, the kingdom celebrated a wedding unlike any it had seen in years. Not because a duke had chosen a bride, but because two people who had both carried old burdens finally found peace together. As I walked through Mother's rose garden one last time, before leaving for my new home, I realized something I had never understood as a frightened girl. Eulalie had torn my dress, believing she was destroying my future. Instead, she had torn apart the lies that had imprisoned me for years. Sometimes, the deepest humiliation becomes the very doorway to freedom. And sometimes, the person who tries hardest to shame you unknowingly leads you toward the life you were always meant to live. Spring returned to the Wrenley estate with a gentleness I had almost forgotten. The rose garden bloomed brighter than it had since my mother's lifetime. White roses climbed the stone walls, filling the morning air with their sweet fragrance. Every sunrise reminded me that life could begin again, even after the darkest winter. The estate no longer echoed with fear. Servants laughed openly as they worked. Children from nearby villages ran through the gardens during festivals. Without worrying, they would be chased away. The old halls, once filled with whispers and secrets, now carried music once more. Sometimes I would pause in the middle of the corridor, close my eyes, and simply listen. Peace had a sound. For years I had never noticed it, because I had lived surrounded by cruelty. Now I treasured every quiet moment. Old Bram had finally retired from his endless work in the gardens, though no one could stop him from wandering among the roses each morning. Whenever I caught him secretly pulling weeds or trimming branches, he would smile like a mischievous child. "I've retired," he always insisted, "not from loving this place." His words made me laugh every single time. Duke Alaric often joined me during evening walks. Neither of us spoke much. We had both learned that silence shared with the right person could say far more than endless conversations. One evening we stopped beneath the oldest white rose bush. "My mother planted this one," I told him. He gently touched one of the blossoms. "It survived everything. So did we." He smiled. "So you finally believe that?" I looked at him thoughtfully. There was a time I believed surviving meant remaining silent. And now I know surviving means choosing truth, even when it hurts. He nodded without another word. The kingdom slowly healed after the trials. Families who had lost their homes because of corruption finally received justice. Stolen estates were returned to their rightful owners. Many innocent people stepped forward with stories they had been too frightened to tell before. I attended several of the hearings, not because I wished to relive painful memories, but because I wanted every victim to know they were no longer alone. Pain loses some of its power when someone finally believes your story. That lesson changed me forever. One afternoon I stood inside Father's restored study. For years I had imagined it as a place filled only with unanswered questions. Now it had become my favorite room in the house. His books rested neatly upon the shelves. His writing desk stood beside the window, exactly where he had left it. Sunlight poured across the polished wood. I placed my hand upon the surface and whispered softly, "I understand now." The grief never completely disappeared. I don't think it ever truly does. But grief no longer controlled my life. It became another way of remembering someone worth loving. Months passed. Life settled into a peaceful rhythm, yet every now and then, I would catch myself looking toward the front gates without knowing why. Perhaps because after surviving betrayal, part of the heart always expects another storm. Alaric noticed it before I ever admitted it. "You still wait for something." "I suppose I do." "What is it?" "I don't know." He looked toward the distant hills. "Sometimes people spend so long preparing for disaster that peace feels unfamiliar." His words stayed with me for days. He was right. Learning to trust happiness required courage too. One rainy afternoon, while sorting through the final boxes recovered from Father's old storage room, I discovered something hidden beneath a loose wooden panel. It wasn't gold. It wasn't another ledger. It was a small portrait. The painting showed Father standing beside a younger man dressed in military uniform. That young man was unmistakably Alaric. On the back of the portrait, written in Father's familiar handwriting, were only a few words. For the day, truth finally sets us free. I carried the portrait outside, where Alaric was waiting beneath the covered terrace. When he saw it, emotion filled his eyes. I thought this had been lost forever. So did Father know all along that we'd meet again? He smiled gently. I believe he hoped we would. For the first time, it felt as though Father's final wish had quietly found its way home. As the years passed, visitors often asked me how I had found the strength to endure everything that happened. I never answered with stories about courage, because the truth was much simpler. There were many days when I wasn't brave, many nights when I wanted to give up, many moments when I believed the people hurting me would never face justice. The difference was that I kept taking one more step, then another. Sometimes that is all courage really is. One more step. If my story teaches anything, I hope it reminds you that someone else's cruelty does not decide your worth. The people who try hardest to humiliate you are often revealing the emptiness inside themselves, not the value inside you. Never let another person's bitterness become the voice you believe. Your future deserves a kinder storyteller than your past. As I looked across the blooming roses one final time, I realized that the greatest victory had never been marrying a duke. It had been becoming the woman fear could no longer control. And yet, every ending carries the quiet beginning of another story. Just a few weeks after our wedding, a traveler arrived carrying news from a distant province. He claimed someone connected to the conspiracy had escaped before the trials ended. More strangely, he carried a signet ring bearing the same mysterious crest found inside Father's secret ledgers. When he asked to speak with me by name, I felt the familiar weight of destiny knocking at my door once again. Perhaps some truth still waited beyond the horizon. If you were standing beside me, what would you have done after everything that happened? Would you have agreed to meet the stranger, or would you have walked away and protected the peace you fought so hard to earn? I'd truly love to hear your thoughts, because every choice tells us something about who we are. Thank you for sharing this journey with me. If this story touched your heart, made you angry, hopeful, or reminded you that kindness is never weakness, please subscribe to the channel and join me for the next adventure. Your support means more than you know, and I'd love to see you in the next story.